Welcome to our channel. Please subscribe, leave a like, and activate the bell. It began with something as ordinary as dust. A fine gray film settled on the floor as he scraped the paint from the living room wall. His movements slow and methodical, not because he lacked energy, but because he had nowhere else to be. The city outside buzzed with the sounds of late summer, but inside his modest third-floor apartment, it was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that creeps into your bones and makes you forget you were ever part of the noise. He had just moved in 3 weeks ago. A new apartment, a new city, a fresh starter. So he kept telling himself what he hadn't admitted, even to himself, was that this place wasn't just a blank canvas. It was a retreat from something unspoken, a failed relationship, a missed opportunity, the gnawing sense that life had quietly slipped into autopilot, maybe all of them. May. All he knew was that the peeling paint on the far wall irritated him more than it should have, and he needed to do something about it. So he worked. No music, no TV, just the gentle scrape of his metal tool against the uneven plaster, revealing layers of colors like the rings of a tree. Cream, then a faded lilac, then an ugly mustard yellow that made him pause and smirk at whoever had once chosen it. He leaned closer to inspect the old layer, rubbing it with his thumb, when something strange caught his eye. Just beneath the chipped corner, where the light hit at a certain angle, he saw it. A curve, a line, a letter. He blinked and leaned in closer. Using a finer tool, he carefully scraped away the top coat, revealing more, and then the message appeared. Not stenciled, not painted, but handwritten, scrawled in black ink, jagged and urgent, as though written in haste. If you're reading this, there's still time to stop me. I'll be at the station at 6 p.m. His heart skipped a beat. He read the line again, slowly. If you're reading this, there's still time to stop me. He sat back on his heels, the scraper slipping from his hand, clattering softly onto the floor. For a moment, he just stared at the message. It wasn't just the content that gripped him, it was the intimacy of it. Someone had written this with their own hand, not for a crowd, not for the world, but for one person. Appelé a final chance. A hope clung to the wall like an echo waiting to be heard. Below the message was a date. 10 years ago to the day. He checked his phone to be sure. August 5th, exactly a decade. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out. The message burning in the back of his mind. The city was the same as it always was. Cars streaming like ants. People rushing from nowhere to nowhere. Lives unfolding at breakneck speed. But suddenly, it all felt distant, irrelevant. Back inside, he took a photo of the wall. Zoomed in on the handwriting. The ink had bled slightly into the plaster, but the words were unmistakable. I'll be at the station at 6 p.m. A million questions followed, as if someone had opened a dam in his brain. Who wrote this? Why hide it? Did someone ever find it before? Did anyone show up at the station? What happened at 6 Policial Militaron that day 10 years ago? He tried to imagine the scene. A woman, he imagined her as a woman, though he couldn't explain why sitting alone on a bench, checking the time every few seconds, heart pounding, eyes scanning every face that passed. or maybe standing, pacing nervously, hoping against hope that someone would come and read what she had left behind, that someone would still care enough to stop her. And no one came. The thought haunted him. He spent the rest of the afternoon in a kind of trance, the renovation forgotten, the mess untouched. He sat on the couch and stared at the photo of the message. The edges were blurred, like a ghost pressing against the veil of time. It didn't make sense. Not logically. Not rationally. 10 years was a long time. Whoever wrote it was probably gone, moved on, disappeared, or worse. But what if they weren't? He didn't sleep well that night. Dreams came in fragments. A train, a figure standing in the rain, a station clock stuck at 6 o'clock. He woke up disoriented, the message still echoing in his mind like a chorus he couldn't forget. The next morning, he did what he hadn't done in years. He wrote in a journal. Just one sentence. What if I go to the station at 6 p.m.? It was ridiculous. Completely. And yet, the thought wouldn't leave him. It lingered like perfume in an empty room, or a voice on a voicemail you can't delete. The wall was still there, the message still intact. He touched the ink gently, feeling a strange warmth despite its age. He imagined the writer's hand trembling as they wrote it. What kind of desperation leads someone to etch their final hope behind layers of paint? Had they run out of time? Did they stand at the station until the sun went down, waiting in vain? The city station wasn't far, 3 subway stops away. He knew it well. He'd passed through it a dozen times without thinking. But now, it loomed in his mind like a place where time had paused and never resumed. Throughout the day, he told himself to forget it. It was just graffiti, a relic, a coincidence, but his heart argued otherwise. By late afternoon, he had made his choice. He put on a clean shirt, grabbed his phone, and walked to the mirror. He looked at himself freely, looked. For once, the lines under his eyes didn't bother him. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. This wasn't a date. It was something else. A search, maybe, for closure, for meaning, for something larger than himself. The train ride was quiet. He sat by the window, watching the buildings blur past, each one filled with people who would never know about the message on his wall. At the next stop, a young couple boarded, laughing and sharing earbuds. She envied them how easy it seemed, how simple. Then he remembered the message again. Love isn't always easy. Sometimes it's missed entirely. He arrived at the station at 5:52 p.m. and waited. The next chapter was about to begin. There are moments in life when time doesn't just pass, stretches, bends, curls itself around a single question. That's what the station felt like at 5:59 p.m. Not a place of transit or noise, but a pocket of suspended time. He stood by the far end of the platform, beneath the electronic schedule board, pretending to check arrival times while secretly watching every person who entered. A man in a navy suit, a woman carrying a pink umbrella, even though there was no rain, a teenager with earphones. None of them noticed him. None of them looked like someone waiting for a stranger from a message on a wall written 10 years ago. The digital clock turned. 6 p.m. He held his breath. A train arrived on track 3. Doors opened. A few passengers stepped off. None looked lost. None looked like they were searching for someone, and yet he stayed. For reasons he couldn't explain even to himself, he remained rooted to the spot. It was as if the message had somehow stitched a thread between him and this place, between the present and something long buried in the past. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was obligation. Like someone had whispered, "Be there," and he had obeyed. 10 minutes passed, then 20. He walked along the edge of the platform slowly, scanning every bench, every corner. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. A sign, a person, a leftover trace of the past. But everything around him was modern, brightly lit, efficient. The station had likely undergone renovations over the years. If there was once someone here waiting, all evidence of their presence was erased by time, like footprints washed away by rain. But just as he was about to leave, something caught his eye. In the far corner of the platform, nearly obscured by a maintenance sign, was a bench. Old, wooden. Unlike the others, which were sleek and new, this one had scuff marks and iron legs, and on one of its wooden slats, faint and nearly invisible, were carved letters worn down by time but still legible under the right light. 6 p.m., August 5th. I waited. He froze. A rush of goosebumps spread across his skin. It was real. Someone had waited. It wasn't just a message on a wall. It was a chapter in someone's unfinished story. He sat on the bench slowly, as if disturbing it would erase the ghost of the person who once sat there. His mind began to race. Who wrote the message in the apartment? And who wrote this one here? Were they the same person or two? Did the one who wrote on the wall come here and wait in vain? He imagined her again, the same woman from his mind the night before. This time more vividly. A long coat, a scarf, perhaps even gloves. Despite the warmth, maybe she'd come early 5:30, just in case. Maybe she looked at every train that arrived with growing desperation. Maybe she kept checking her phone, hoping for a message that never came. Maybe, when 6:30 passed, she carved the words into the bench as her final act of hope and sorrow. He looked around the platform again. It was almost empty now. A train whooshed past on the opposite side, wind sweeping his coat back and stirring the small pieces of paper near the bench. The noise echoed, then faded. Silence returned. He stood and walked slowly toward the exit. As he stepped onto the escalator, he felt something shift inside him. Not a revelation, but a weight. Like he'd stumbled into someone else's heartbreak and now carried a piece of it. That night, back in his apartment, the wall felt different. Not just a wall anymore. A memorial, a whisper, a page in a novel without an ending. He looked at the message again and sat down with his laptop. He searched for tenant records, ownership, logs, anything that might reveal who had lived there 10 years ago. But most of the records were private or lost to time. The next day, he went to the building's superintendent, a woman in her 50s, warm but brisk, who raised an eyebrow when he mentioned the date. 10 years ago, she said. Let me think. She pulled out a dusty folder and flipped through a few pages. That apartment's had a few tenants, but around that time, yes, there was a girl, maybe in her 20s, quiet, always paid on time. Do you remember her name? The woman squinted. Sophie or Sophia, something like that. She was a painter, I think. kept to herself, a painter. He felt a shiver. Had she written the message in a moment of artistic despair? Do you know where she went? The superintendent shook her head. No idea. One day she just left. Left the key. No damage. Nothing stolen. Just gone. Gone. He thanked her and returned upstairs. That night, he sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photograph of the message again. He zoomed in, studying the handwriting. Could he compare it to the carving on the bench? Would a handwriting expert be able to tell if it was the same person? He printed both photos and taped them side by side on the wall. The loops, the slants, the pressure, they felt similar. He wasn't a detective. He wasn't even a particularly curious person by nature, but this mystery had claimed him. The next few days became an obsession. He went back to the station at 6 p.m. every evening, not because he expected someone to be there, but because it felt like ritual, as if by repeating it, he might somehow bend time backward and glimpse the moment when everything had gone wrong. On the third evening, he noticed something strange. A woman was sitting on the old bench, lachi 20s, maybe early 30s, hair tied in a loose bun, reading a book. He sat on the opposite bench and watched. Not in a creepy way, just observing. She didn't look up once, didn't check her phone, didn't fidget. She just read when the train came. She didn't board. When it left, she kept reading. At 6:20 p.m., she stood, closed the book, and walked away. The next day, she was there again and again. By the fifth day, he approached her. "Hi," he said nervously. "Sorry to bother you. I've noticed you come here often around this time." She looked up at him, studying his face for a moment, then smiled gently. "I could say the same about you." They sat in silence for a while, the city buzzing faintly around them. "Do you come here for someone?" he finally asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "My sister," she said. "She used to come here every year. Same day, same time. She called it her tradition." "Why?" The woman smiled faintly. "A boy never showed up 10 years ago. She left him a message, said she'd be at the station at 6. Waited an hour. He never came." His heart pounded. What happened to her? "She left the city. Eventually moved to Europe. But she told me she kept wondering what if he never saw the message? What if something happened? I guess she couldn't let it go." He swallowed hard. "What was her name?" "Sophia," the woman said. "Why?" He looked at the ground. No reason. A message. A wall. A missed connection. A decade of wondering. A story frozen in time. Until now. Some choices aren't really choices. They begin as questions, circling quietly in the back of the mind. Then, over time, they become obsessions inescapable, like a song you can't stop humming. For him, the decision to return to the station wasn't a matter of logic or curiosity anymore. It had transformed into something deeper. Personal, emotional, a commitment not just to unravel a stranger's forgotten heartbreak, but to answer a question he didn't even know he had been asking. What if fate leaves us clues and we simply forget to look? In the days after meeting Sophia's sister, his world began to shift. He no longer felt like a man just living in someone else's apartment. He was a witness now, a participant in a mystery that had unfolded 10 years ago and was still echoing through time like an unfinished sentence. Every time he passed a message on the wall, he paused, ran his fingers across the words, and reread them as if they'd somehow changed. If you're reading this, there's still time to stop me. I'll be at the station at 6 p.m. A plea, a last-ditch confession, and now a challenge. He started keeping a notebook, scribbling thoughts, theories, and fragments of imagined dialogue. He walked the neighborhood, visiting the coffee shop downstairs, the florist at the corner, the tiny bookstore with dust-covered shelves, asking politely if they remembered a young painter named Sophia from 10 years ago. Most didn't. A few shrugged. One elderly man at the bookstore paused. "Sophia?" he murmured, his voice like dry leaves. "Yes, she used to come in here, quiet, bought old poetry books. Dickinson, Neruda, always paid in coins, had paint on her hands. Do you remember anything unusual?" The man blinked. "Distant," she cried once. "In the poetry aisle, I asked if she was all right," she said. "It's not the poems, it's the timing." Then she left. Never saw her again. That single sentence rang in his head for hours. It's not the poems, it's the timing. He knew then that Sophia hadn't written the message lightly. It wasn't whimsical. It was calculated. She was hurt, maybe abandoned, but not broken. She'd left it not as a farewell, but as a possibility. A door cracked open, and for 10 years, no one had walked through. Until now. On the 10th day, he sat again at the old bench in the station. This time, Sophia's sister didn't appear. He was alone with the memory of someone he'd never met. The train pulled in, passengers boarded, others exited. Among the crowd, he watched a couple embrace near the track, a woman in red and a man with a briefcase. They hugged like it was the last time they'd ever see each other. He wondered what their story was. Did they once miss each other and now finally find the timing right? At 6:15, he stood and walked away, determined to stop living only in someone else's past. He had to make a decision not just about uncovering Sophia's story, but about his own. For too long, he had let life happen to him. He'd coasted through jobs, relationships, conversations, always polite, distant, but something about this message on the wall had struck a chord he didn't know he had. It was as if someone had written directly to him through time. That night, he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, when a thought emerged with clarity. What if I'm not here to solve Sophia's mystery, but to continue it? He couldn't sleep after that. He sat up, lit a lamp, and opened his notebook. He began writing not theories or notes, but a letter to Sophia. "Dear Sophia, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know if you're still in the country, but I found your message. 10 years too late, but I found it. And I went to the station. I sat on the bench where you waited, read the words you carved, and tried to imagine what it must have felt like to hope and hurt at the same time. I don't know who you were waiting for. I don't know why they never came, but I believe someone should have. Maybe you didn't write that message for me, but it feels like I was meant to find it. I live in your old apartment now. The paint is different, but your words remain. I haven't covered them. I won't. If you ever return to this city, if you ever wonder if someone cared enough to follow your trail, come to the station. I'll be there. August 5, 6 p.m. Just like you asked, even if nothing happens, even if no one comes, it's worth it. Sincerely, the stranger who listened. He folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and wrote only 2 words on the front. For Sophia, he brought it to the station the next day and slid it under the bench's frame, wedged into the metal slat. Maybe she'd never see it. But maybe he returned home feeling lighter. That night, he began painting the living room wall, but not to cover the message. Instead, he painted around it, framing it in soft pastels, blending color like sunrise around black ink. The message wasn't a flaw, was the centerpiece. The following week, he made his decision. He booked a train ticket to a seaside town where, according to a Facebook post he'd found buried in an art school archive, Sophia had once hosted a gallery show. It was a long shot, but he needed answers not just for her, but for himself. When he arrived, the gallery was gone converted into a bakery. But in the corner of the shop, near the window, hung a photograph of the gallery's final show, and there she was. Sophia, older now, hair longer, a camera slung around her shoulder, alive, real. He asked the bakery owner if they knew her. "Oh, Sophia? Yeah. She comes by sometimes, lives about 30 minutes inland now. Teaches art to kids." "Why? Old friend?" He hesitated. "Something like that." He left his contact information just in case. Back in his apartment, the wall remained untouched. A message frozen in time but no longer unread. A heart broken but not forgotten. A decision made not for closure, but for connection. And then the phone rang. An unknown number. He answered, a soft voice on the other end. "Did you really find my message?" He froze. "Yes," he said. "And I went to the station 10 days in a row." A silence. Then I guess I owe you a story." The decision to go hadn't just changed his life. It had brought Sophia back. The voice on the phone was soft, almost unsure of itself, like someone who hadn't spoken certain words aloud in years and wasn't quite ready to hear how they sounded. And for a long moment, he didn't speak either. He just listened, holding the silence gently between them like an antique glass that might break if handled too roughly. "I didn't think anyone would ever find it," she said. He could hear the distant rustle of leaves, or maybe curtains moving in a summer breeze on her end of the line, wherever she was. It wasn't far, but it also wasn't close. It felt like speaking across time. "I almost painted over it," he admitted, "but I couldn't." It didn't feel like it was meant to be hidden again. There was a pause. "You live there now?" she asked. "Yes." "Then you've seen the light in the mornings through the kitchen window." He smiled. "I have. It's the reason I stayed as long as I did, the way it hits the wall." It always felt like hope. That word hope hung in the air between them. He didn't ask about the person she'd waited for. Not yet. The story would come in its own time. She sounded tired, but not weary. Wounded, maybe, but not bitter. "Would you meet me?" she asked. He felt a rush in his chest before he even answered. "Yes." "Name the time." "Let's meet at the station," she said. "That seems fair, don't you think?" And so, a week later, he stood once again on the platform at 6 p.m. only. This time, he wasn't searching for ghosts. He was waiting for Sophia. It was the same station, the same quiet bench, the same gentle rattle of arriving trains, and the occasional burst of announcements over the speakers. but everything felt different. Charged, like the air was holding its breath. Then he saw her. She stepped onto the platform like she'd been walking toward it for 10 years. She wore a long cardigan, paint-smudged jeans, and carried a canvas bag that looked like it had been through as many storms as she had. Her hair was pulled back loosely, and there was something in her expression that struck him, not sadness, not joy, but recognition. She saw him, and for a moment, they just stood. Two people pulled together by something neither of them could quite explain. A message on a wall, a sentence carved into a bench, a missed moment that somehow found a way to circle back. "Hi," she said when she reached him. "Hi. I didn't know if you'd still be here. I didn't know if you'd ever come." They sat on the bench together. The old one. The one she had waited on a decade earlier. She looked down at the carving and ran her fingers over the faded words. 6 p.m. August 5th. I waited. He watched her carefully. I wrote that after an hour of waiting, I didn't know what else to do. Did he ever find out? She shook her head slowly. I don't think he ever saw the message. Or if he did, maybe he chose not to come. I'll never know. Silence returned for a while. But it wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, like two people standing on either side of a river, waiting for a bridge to form. Finally, he asked, "Do you want to talk about it?" And did. She told him everything. 10 years ago, she was in love. Desperately, foolishly, beautifully in love with someone who never loved her back the same way. They'd shared coffee shops and conversations, long walks and lingering glances. He was charming. Lost. She thought she could be his anchor. She believed in him more than he believed in himself. But he never made a choice. He kept her at arm's length, never saying yes, never saying no, always in between. And then one day, she'd had enough. She told him she was leaving the city, starting fresh. But if he truly wanted her, she'd be at the station at 6 p.m. She wrote the message on the wall that morning, painted around it, and waited. He never came. I stayed until the sun went down, she said, voice quiet. I kept telling myself he was late, that he got stuck, that he'd show up. But after a while, you just know. Some absences are louder than presence. He listened, feeling the weight of her story settled gently on his shoulders. After that, I left, traveled, taught art, fell in love again. Lucia again, time moved on, but I always wondered if someone ever saw that message. I did, he said, and I couldn't look away. She smiled, not with sadness, but with a strange gratitude. You're not who I was waiting for, she said, but maybe you're who I was supposed to meet. He didn't know what to say to that, but he felt it deep in his bones. They talked for hours after that. On the bench, then at a nearby cafe, then walking the city streets until dusk softened into twilight. She told him about the paintings she never finished, the poems she wrote on napkins, the people she loved and the ones she let go. He told her about his quiet life, his career that didn't fulfill him, the walls he had built around himself, until her message cracked them wide open. They were strangers, and yet not. There's something about meeting someone who has already left footprints in the pages of your life, even before you've met them. That makes everything feel inevitable, as if the universe had been slowly, patiently guiding you toward the same intersection. Before she left that evening, she paused at the station entrance. "I'm not asking for anything," she said. "Not a promise, not a future. Just thank you for listening, for being the one who came." He nodded, heart full of words he couldn't say aloud. "Can I see you again?" She smiled. "You already have." She turned and walked into the night, not with the weight of the past, but with something new in her steps. And he stood there, alone on the platform, but this time it didn't feel like waiting. It felt like beginning. Stories don't always end when the last word is written. Sometimes they pause and finished, unresolved, waiting patiently for the right reader or the right moment to pick up the pen again. That's exactly what it felt like in the weeks that followed his meeting with Sophia, as if some forgotten manuscript had been retrieved from a dusty drawer and laid open once more. Not just for her, but for him too. She began to visit the city again, quietly and without ceremony. No dramatic returns, no symbolic gestures, just a quiet step back into a place she once fled. Sometimes they met at the bench, sometimes at the coffee shop around the corner from his building, sometimes at his apartment, the very place where her story had been hidden behind layers of paint for a decade. The first time she walked back into the apartment, she paused in the doorway for a long while. Her eyes swept the room slowly, like someone remembering how to breathe after holding it in for too long. "It's smaller than I remember," she said with a soft smile. "That's what 10 years of memory does," he replied. "It decorates the spaces with emotion." She moved to the wall. The wall, her fingers brushed the framed message. He had carefully outlined it in a narrow wooden frame, surrounding the ink with soft, painted vines, green and golden, tiny flecks of light in the shape of stars. A quiet tribute, an invitation for memory to live without shame. Sophia stared at it for a long time. "I thought about coming back once," she admitted, 2 years after I left. "I was visiting the city. I almost knocked on the door, but I thought, what if someone painted over it?" "I almost did," he said. "But you didn't." "No, I think I knew it wasn't meant to disappear." She turned to him. "That's because you were meant to find it. It wasn't a line from a movie." She said it with the kind of certainty that only people who have walked through darkness understand. It wasn't about fate in a romanticized way. It was about connection, about how some people meet not to fall in love instantly, but to help each other finish what others left incomplete. And so they did something neither of them expected. They began to rewrite the story. Not erase it, not overwrite it, but build upon it. Together, they started with the bench. One afternoon, they returned to the station with a small toolkit and a plaque. It was handcrafted, made of aged brass, etched with a single sentence: "For the hearts who wait and the ones who finally arrive." They fixed it gently to the side of the wooden slat-just beneath Sophia's carved message. No one questioned them. No one stopped them. In a place where thousands moved past every hour, no one noticed two people preserving a moment of stillness. Next, they opened a shared journal, a simple black notebook. Inside, they began documenting the story, from the day he found the message on the wall to the moment she called, and everything in between. Their versions, their memories, their misremembered details. They wrote with honesty, sometimes laughing at how differently they saw the same scene. "I was terrified the night I called," she wrote. I was terrified you wouldn't, he replied on the next page. And with every entry, they weren't just chronicling the past. They were writing their present. Eventually, she brought in the old canvas. A painting she had abandoned the night she left. It had sat in a storage unit all these years unfinished, unspoken for. It was of a station platform, half finished. A woman standing alone in the rain. No one coming. They laid it out on his apartment floor, side by side, brushes in hand. Do you want to finish it? He asked. I don't know how, she said. He smiled. Maybe we don't need to know. Maybe we just need to keep painting. And so, for the first time in 10 years, she did. Stroke by stroke, color returned to the canvas, not just to the sky or the platform, but to the woman's face. The final image didn't show her alone. By the time the painting was done, someone was standing with her. Fussy obscured background, washed in golden light. An unfinished portrait now complete. She donated the painting to a local gallery under the title Aga Cincoth at 6 p.m. It hung silently in a corner for a month before a curator noticed something strange. Visitors stopped in front of it for long minutes. Some whispered. Some cried. One man even asked if it was based on a real story. Yes, the curator said. But no one knows the full story. Back in the apartment, the wall remained untouched. Not hidden, not glorified. Just there. A relic, a root. Every now and then, Sophia would trace the edges of the message and smile. I still don't know why I wrote it on the wall, she said once. I could have written it in a letter or texted him. Maybe you didn't want him to see it, he suggested. Maybe you wanted someone else to. That idea sat between them, delicate and heavy at the same time. She began painting again full-time. Not commercially, not for galleries, but for herself. She filled her new studio with light and soft music and unfinished canvases. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to leave them unfinished, not out of avoidance, but out of patience. And he began to write not fiction, not analysis, but small essays about chance, about love, about how timing isn't everything but courage is. His articles began to circulate quietly online. No one knew the full story behind them, but the people who read them. They felt it. They felt the truth behind the words. One morning, over coffee, he said, we could write a book about this, about us. She looked at him. Is there an ending? She paused. Maybe it doesn't need one. And that was the answer they both had been waiting for. Because some stories aren't meant to end. Some are meant to be lived, revisited. When the 10th anniversary of the original message arrived again, they returned to the station. This time, they weren't searching. They were celebrating. They sat on the bench and watched the trains pass. The passengers boarding, the lives moving, and then something remarkable happened. A young woman approached the bench, noticed the plaque, and paused. She reached into her bag, pulled out a pen, and in the notebook left beneath the seat, the one they'd secretly placed there. Weeks earlier she wrote, I waited here once, too, but maybe now I won't have to wait alone. Sophia looked at him, her eyes widgy. Do you see what's happening? He nodded. They hadn't just rewritten a story. They'd invited others to continue it. Time doesn't always march forward in a straight line. Sometimes it circles back, folding memories into present moments. Sometimes it brings two people to the same place they once changed, but still holding the thread that first tied their stories together. And that's exactly how it felt 1 year later, as they walked hand in hand into the station where everything had begun. Agost 5, 6 p.m. Again, but this Chimi, there was no waiting. Only presence. The wooden bench was still there, still weathered, still familiar. The small brass plaque they had affixed months ago had tarnished slightly in the summer humidity, but its message was as clear as ever. For the hearts who wait and the ones who finally arrive. The station was busier this time. Rush hour swirled around them, business people with coffee cups, teenagers with skateboards, tourists fumbling through maps. And yet, the two of them were still a calm in the center of it all. He watched her trace her fingers along the top slat of the bench, just like she had that first day they met here again. Only now, she wasn't reliving the pain of being left behind. She was remembering and letting go. "I don't hate him anymore," she said softly, referring to the man who never came all those years ago. "For a long time, I did. But now, I think maybe he wasn't supposed to." He nodded, knowing she didn't need agreement, just understanding. Sometimes, closure doesn't come from confrontation or apology. Sometimes, it comes from reclaiming the narrative. They had both done that, but the story didn't end there. Because over the past 12 months, something extraordinary had begun to take shape quietly, almost invisibly. What started as a plaque had become a phenomenon. One by one, strangers had begun to leave messages at the bench. Folded notes, pressed flowers, Polaroids, pages torn from journals, some addressed to lost lovers, others to family members, a few to no one at all. He and Sophia had come back week after week to collect them. At first, they kept them in a shoebox, but as the notes piled up, they decided to archive them properly. They reached out to the city's local historical society and proposed an idea, an exhibit called the Station of Second Chances. They didn't mention the original message on the wall. That part they kept for themselves. But they shared the hundreds of stories left at the bench, the ones written in ink and trembling handwriting, full of longing, regret, hope, forgiveness. The exhibit launched in early spring, and people came in droves. They came not to gawk, but to feel, to remember their own almosts, their own could-have-been. Some stood in silence before the display cases. Others cried openly. A few left new messages on a replica bench at the entrance, continuing the cycle. Sophia watched it unfold with a quiet kind of awe. "I think people just want to be seen," she said one evening as they walked the gallery floor after closing. "Even if it's by strangers, even if it's 10 years too late." He nodded. "I think people want to believe their feelings mattered, that they weren't shouting into a void." "And you did that?" she whispered. "You heard something most people would have painted over?" He smiled. "You wrote something most people would have been too scared to write." And it was true. In a world of unread messages and broken promises, hers had made it through the fog of time, and in doing so, it had pulled him out of his own numbness. Their meeting wasn't just a second chance for her. It was a beginning for both of them. One summer night, after walking through the city streets with ice cream cones and laughter still on their lips, they sat on his apartment floor, the apartment that used to be her son, opened their shared journal. It was nearly full now. Page after page told not only the story of the wall and the bench, but of them. The moments in between. The conversations over dinner. The argument they had about what color to paint the bathroom. The time he got food poisoning and she stayed up with him all night, even though he told her to go home. The quiet Sundays spent in separate rooms, working on their own projects, comforted by each other's presence. He flipped to the final page. Blank. They looked at each other. No words spoken. And then she picked up the pen and wrote, "We thought this story began with a goodbye, but it was always a hello waiting for its moment." She capped the pen, closed the book. He leaned over and kissed her forehead, then rested his chin on the top of her head. They stayed like that for a long while. Sometimes the loudest endings are the quietest. Not long after, Sophia began teaching workshops again, this time, incorporating the bench stories into her classes. She used the messages as creative prompts, asking her students to imagine the lives behind the words. She taught them that behind every message left in secret is a voice desperate to be heard. He kept writing. Only now, his essays bore a different tone. Not sorrow, not lone, but clarity, conviction, grace. Their home became a sanctuary, not just for each other, but for others. Two artists passing through town, friends in crises, strangers who reached out after reading his articles or seeing the gallery exhibit. They didn't try to explain their story anymore. They simply lived it. But every year, on August 5th, at 6 p.m., they returned to the station. And 1 year on, the 5th anniversary of their first Medinga, teenage boy was already sitting on the bench when they arrived. He looked nervous, fidgety, holding a single envelope in his lap. When he saw them, he stood Ayu, the ones who made the exhibit. He asked, they nodded. He held out the envelope. I wrote something, but I didn't know where to leave it. Sophia smiled. You've come to the right place. He left a note beneath the bench and walked away. They didn't open it. They never did. It wasn't theirs to read. But as they sat down, hand in hand, beneath the familiar flicker of the station's overhead lights, they knew they had rewritten their story. But more than that, they had created a space where others could begin theirs. And so the message on the wall that had once been a final plea became something else entirely. A signal, a thread, a promise that no matter how far we fall, how long we wait, or how much time has passed, there is always someone listening. There is always still time. The end.